This gospel was rediscovered in 1887 in Egypt, in the tomb of a monk, and most experts agree that its composition dates back to the mid-2nd century.
Está datada em meados do século II.
This gospel was known in the early church, having been accepted by Serapion of Antioch and referenced by Origen, Eusebius of Caesarea, Jerome of Stridon, and Theodoret of Cyrus.
Teodoreto de Ciro. Ainda assim,
however, it is important to remember that there are no passages of the gospel quoted in the works of these early church theologians. We only know that there existed a gospel attributed to Peter.
Atribuída a Pedro.
In this gospel, the author writes some phrases in the first person and identifies himself as Simon Peter. However, just like in the canonical Gospels, the authorship of this gospel cannot be definitively attributed to Peter or anyone else. According to the author John Dominic Crossan, it is in this Gospel of Peter that we find the oldest account of the death and resurrection of Jesus. The word apocryphal comes from the Greek apokryphos, which means hidden. In literature, the term is commonly used to designate those books that were kept clandestine, and in bibliology, it is used to identify religious works from the early church that lacked canonical authority, meaning they were not read in public worship because they were not considered the word of God given to men. It is worth remembering that the term apocryphal should not be considered pejorative, as its content may contain truths, whether theological or historical. Apocryphal Gospels are texts written in different periods, with many belonging to the early church and others to the medieval period. This series will only present comments, curiosities, and references about these texts, serving as a guide to introduce the topics and to arouse interest in delving deeper into the knowledge of salvation history. The complete texts can be found freely on the internet, and for this series, the translation by Professor Federico Lorenzo of the University of Coimbra, published in 2022, was consulted. The Gospel of Peter. The first important point to begin the narrative of this gospel is to clarify that it is incomplete, and we do not know if it really starts abruptly, already with Herod and Pilate handing Jesus over to those who wanted to kill him, getting rid of the responsibility of the condemnation. Joseph of Arimathea, a friend of Jesus and also a known character from the canonical Gospels, is here also described as a friend of Pilate, and seeing that Jesus would be crucified, he goes ahead and asks Pilate to bury Jesus' body. Pilate sends a messenger to Herod, who responds saying that in any case, Jesus would be buried before sunset on Friday, according to Jewish law. Herod hands Christ over to the people, and here this people is not described as Jewish, and they put on him a purple robe and mock him, sitting him on the judgment seat and saying, "Judge with justice, O King of Israel."
Julga com justiça, ó Rei de Israel. Deles
One of them brings the crown of thorns and puts it on Jesus, and others spit, hit with a cane, and whip him while mocking that this is how the Son of God would be honored.
que se honraria o Filho de Deus.
Here it does not describe a via crucis or the place of crucifixion, and the scene jumps to Jesus being crucified between two here described as malefactors. An interesting detail, the Gospel says that Jesus was silent, as if he were not feeling pain. It is important to note that the author does not claim that Jesus did not feel pain, which indicates that there was no subsequent account of Jesus telling the author about it, but rather that the witness observed a resigned serenity, accepting what is happening as inevitable and, with his silence, seems to express an absence of physical suffering in human eyes.
Parece expressar uma ausência de sofrimento físico aos olhos humanos. Ao endireitar a cruz,
When straightening the cross, the soldiers write, "This is the King of Israel." Then, they make bets to see who will get each piece of Jesus' clothes. One of the crucified malefactors revolts and questions the soldiers, saying that he indeed deserves his condemnation, but that Jesus did nothing but save humanity, did no harm to anyone. The soldiers then, furious, say that this man's legs will not be broken, so that he dies tortured. Much is studied about how the person's death by crucifixion was, but it is known that the act of breaking legs was done so that the crucified, unable to support the weight of the body with the legs, would suffocate. It was considered an act of mercy because a crucified person could take several days to die. It was noon, and darkness takes over the place. People become desperate because the Sabbath could not begin with an executed person still in process, according to what the Gospel says is written. This Gospel makes it difficult to identify between Jews, the people, Roman soldiers, and Herod's guard because it always refers to people in a generic way, without giving them any ethnic or professional label. Then, Jesus receives the mixture of gall and vinegar, another way to torture him a little more. The Gospel describes that it was very dark and some people stumbled, even using lamps. Jesus cries out, saying, my power, you have left me," and dies. At this moment, the veil of the temple is torn in two. Jesus is taken down from the cross, and at the 9th hour, the sun shines again. The body is given to Joseph of Arimathea to bury. Joseph prepares the body and wraps it in a linen cloth, and buries it in his own tomb, in a place known as Joseph's Garden.
Conhecido como Jardim de José.
This gospel also says that the elders and Jews realized the evil they had just done almost instantly. The apostles remain hidden, praying and fasting, while being sought on the charge of wanting to set fire to the temple. The elders and Pharisees receive the news that the people are fearful of the signs received during the crucifixion and, because of this, they believed they had committed an injustice. Worried, they seek Pontius Pilate and request that the tomb be guarded by guards so that the apostles do not steal the body and the people think that Jesus has risen and returned to avenge himself. Pilate accepts the request and sends the centurion Petronius and some soldiers to guard the tomb. The group of soldiers, with the centurion, the elders, and the Pharisees go to the tomb, and at its entrance, they roll a stone and put 7 seals on it. Then, they set up a tent and stay there. When the Sabbath ends, a crowd from Jerusalem and the surrounding areas comes to see the tomb. The guarding soldiers were 4, and they took turns in pairs at the entrance, while the centurion and the elders slept. In the early hours of Saturday to Sunday, just before dawn, a loud voice from heaven was heard, and the soldiers saw that the sky opened and that from there 2 men descended and approached the tomb. The stone placed, with the seals, rolls by itself to the side, and the 2 men enter the tomb. The soldiers run to wake up the centurion and the elders to tell them what was happening, and as they tell, they see 3 men coming out of the tomb, 2 of them supporting the other, and the cross follows behind them. The Gospel describes that the heads of the 2 reached up to heaven, and the one they were leading surpassed the heavens. Those who were there hear a voice from heaven asking, "Did you proclaim to those who sleep?" And a response is heard from the cross, "Yes." The soldiers and elders deliberate and decide to immediately reveal what happened to Pilate, and as they talk, the sky opens again, and another person descends and enters the tomb. They hastily go to Pilate and tell him everything that happened, concluding that Jesus was indeed the Son of God. Pilate reiterates that he is innocent of Christ's blood, and that they are the guilty ones. Afraid, they request that all witnesses keep secret what they witnessed because they feared the reaction of the Jews. Pilate accepts and passes the order to the soldiers. In the early hours of Sunday to Monday, Mary Magdalene, described here as a disciple of the Lord, gathers some friends and goes to the tomb to weep for Jesus because before she was afraid to do so for fear of the Jews. When they arrive at the tomb, the women find it open, and inside they see a young man who asks them whom they are looking for, and he continues to say that if it is the crucified one, he is no longer there because he has risen and returned to where he was sent from. The women, afraid, flee immediately. With the end of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the disciples, mourning, return to their homes, and Peter and Andrew, along with Levi, son of Alphaeus, return to the sea. Unfortunately, this gospel is incomplete, and here it ends, in this abrupt manner. You may have had an incredulous view of this gospel after reports such as the cross responding to a question while following the resurrected Christ, the two men whose heads were in heaven. But remember the reports of the crucifixion in the Gospel of Matthew, where the dead rise and appear to many in Jerusalem, and also other reports from the canonical Bible of the Old Testament. And when the ass saw the angel of the Lord, she fell down under Balaam, and Balaam's anger was kindled, and he smote the ass with a staff. And the Lord opened the mouth of the ass, and she said unto Balaam, What have I done unto thee, that thou hast smitten me these 3 times? And Balaam said unto the ass, Because thou hast mocked me, I would there were a sword in mine hand, for now would I kill thee. And the ass said unto Balaam, Am not I thine ass, upon which thou hast ridden ever since I was thine unto this day? Was I ever wont to do so unto thee? And he said, Nay. Then the Lord opened the eyes of Balaam, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way, and his sword drawn in his hand, and he bowed down his head, and fell flat on his face. Quoting passages from the canonical Bible, we can draw parallels between narratives that, at first glance, may seem absurd. The intention here is not to belittle or discredit the Bible, but rather the opposite, to make it clear that these books require reflection, study, and contextualization, just like any historical writings. Some religious individuals argue that such studies jeopardize their faith. But is it really possible that by strengthening the foundations of their beliefs with questions that, if not posed by ourselves, will be posed by others, and by finding and understanding these questions, they may have the effect of diminishing faith? Honestly, it seems to me that it is quite the opposite, that deeply questioning and seeking these answers strengthen faith, because this faith is built on a solid foundation, like the house built on the rock, as described by Jesus in the canonical Gospel of Matthew. Therefore whosoever heareth these sayings of mine, and doeth them, I will liken him unto a wise man, which built his house upon a rock. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew, and beat upon that house, and it fell not, for it was founded upon a rock. And every one that heareth these sayings of mine, and doeth them not, shall be likened unto a foolish man, which built his house upon the sand. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew, and beat upon that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. Matthew 7 verses 24 to 27. This documentary has no intention to stir up controversy on the topic, as there is no reason to do so. For a long time, the apocryphal texts have sparked more discussions about whether they should be read or not, rather than about the reading and reflection on the texts themselves. They are part of the history of the Church and Christianity, just like the other books of the Christian Bible, and in them, we find the roots of many Christian traditions around the world. It is also worth noting that the Christian Bible differs among the various Christian denominations, as there are differences between the Orthodox, Catholic, and Protestant Bibles in the number of books in each canon. To understand and reflect on the apocryphal texts, one must undertake the same exercise as studying the Bible and any other historical writings, understanding the time, place, culture, language, in short, the historical context. There are things that were common 100 years ago and would be unacceptable today, therefore, it is reasonable to assume that when discussing things that were written 2,000 years ago, the shock would be even stronger. This is not unique to the Bible or religion but rather to history itself. In the case of this series, which will only deal with the apocryphal Gospels, we have the opportunity to consult other sources about the people who lived with Christ and about Christ himself, since there is a fact here that is no different from the canonical Gospels. Everything written about Christ was written by people who were around him and by the communities founded by these and other people. Jesus himself left nothing in writing. And I say only the apocryphal Gospels because there are also apocryphal books of the Old Testament and epistles. The curiosity about the facts of Christ's life and the origins of the religion and traditions of Christianity is present in various groups of our society. The series was made with the intention of satisfying some of the endless interest in what is undoubtedly the greatest historical figure of humanity, Jesus Christ.